As one who believes in God very strongly, if we had a spiritual unity in this community, then we would have economic, politically, and social unity. And so I'm very optimistic that within 3 years, you're going to see a spiritual revival of the east side of Buffalo, the likes of which I have never seen. And working with these ministers for the last 2 months has probably been one of the most rewarding experiences of my lifetime. And I am very, very excited. He also wanted me to share on a couple of other things. Henry Taylor has documented beyond a shadow of a doubt that our city is in trouble. This city is the poorest of all cities in the state of New York. And by virtue of it, we have to supply 75% of its school budget from the state of New York. No other school district in the state receives more than 50% of its school budget from the state. But we've had to, over the years, try to keep pumping more money in, more money in. At one time, we used to put more, and Jimmy Griffin used to take out money. He would contribute less. It was the most insidious thing in the world. In fact, the maintenance of effort education law was sponsored by me because of what this mayor was doing. As we would put more money in, he would contribute less from the city's part. To this mayor's credit, he's the first mayor, not only of Jimmy Griffin, but Stanley Mikowski, Mayor Sedita, all of them, that far back as I can remember, used to contribute less as we contribute more. And so hopefully that period has stopped. And it's sort of frightening to realize that people allowed that to go on in this city for so long. There's an interesting thing that happened, and Byron Brown is aware of this. I found out about Section 3 3 years ago from a fellow in Albany. Brought it to the city, had him write up a policy for the Section 3, which meant that any federal money that comes from HUD, that if the city had a Section 3 policy, it would offer job opportunities. I was sharing with Mr. Baker and another gentleman, if this city had implemented Section 3 when it became law in 1968, we would literally have no unemployment in the black community. Because it says, as a policy, the city says now, for every HUD dollar that comes in, would you believe that Hyatt Hotel had HUD money? The Hilton Hotel had HUD money? Gold Dome Bank had HUD money? I mean, so many money came into this city. You know why HUD money comes to this city? Because of poverty and race. That's two of the main factors. And our people did not benefit by virtue of that money. Over 10 years, $1 billion came in. And now we have a Section 3 policy. It was written by a gentleman from Albany, New York, named Al Washington for me. We gave it to the mayor, we gave it to Sharon West. Sharon implemented it immediately. It says that 40% of all jobs created by any HUD money that flows into the city must go to Section 3 eligible residents. This might turn out to be the best affirmative action program the city's ever had. We just got a Hope 6 grant. Some of us worked going to Washington, meeting with Andrew Cuomo. A Hope 6 grant of $28 million, am I correct, Byron?
Yeah.
That will be matched with 3 private dollars. So it'll be $112 million spent on the Lower West Side. 40% of all of those jobs will go to city residents. And Crystal, that means a lot of your graduates who finished McKinley High School haven't been able to get jobs, but if they're living here in this city and they have the skills, many of them will be able to work. And then we're looking at the Title VI law that's been around a long time and seeing how we can use that to make more job opportunities available for people in this community. I'm a little frightened, though, by the new welfare reform that the president signed. You're going to be talking about education, but the best program for getting people off of public assistance was a 2-year college associate's degree. That's a national statistics. 2-year associate's degree was the best get off of welfare program in the nation. President Clinton signed a welfare reform law that allows you only 1 year of education. And as a sponsor and the author of SEEK and EOP and HEOP and STEP and C-STEP and Liberty Partnership and the Professional Opportunity Programs, I can tell you there have been thousands of women and men on welfare who now have bachelor's degrees. who are able to get an EOP and HEOP program. That will not be the case anymore. That will not be the case anymore. And so we're struggling now to devise a way in which those who are trying to pursue their 2-year associate's degree, that if we can find a way, and Henry, maybe you and others who can help, where non-for-profit agencies can let them work their 20 hours a week on workfare while they also be able to go to college. And I'd like to challenge this fraternity to take a look at that, to see how we can work together in this community to provide what they call workfare opportunities for them to do this makeshift work stuff while they also pursue their 2-year college associate's degree. And that's going to be a task of all of us, of finding non-for-profit agencies and institutions that would allow these predominantly women to come in and work their 20 hours a week on this welfare work, as well as continue to go to school. Then we're going to have to look at how can we provide child care services for them while they're doing their workfare, and also make sure that the county gets it to them while they're getting their education. And that's a project we all need to be very, very much involved in. It's going to take a lot. But on a positive aspect, this community, religious leaders, were number one. They was number one in the nation, in the state. It was coming out publicly. I worked with Bishop Anderson, Reverend Gillison, Reverend Lewis, Bishop Mansell of the Roman Catholic Church, Bishop Bowman, Rabbi Freeman. They issued the best statement of any religious group in the state against the welfare recommendations of George Pataki. George Pataki and Dennis Gorski had the 2 worst proposals in the state to cut people off of welfare and reduce their grants. Now you have to understand that 77% of the poverty in the county of Erie is in the city of Buffalo. And you read the statistics about the level of poverty in this city. And if we had allowed George Pataki and the county executive to reduce the welfare grants the way they wanted it, then people would not have been able to pay rent. When they're not able to pay rent, they are evicted. When they're evicted, you get vacant buildings. And when you see people on public assistance, someone say, well, I'm not on public assistance. I don't care if they cut their grants. It doesn't affect me. It does affect you. When people don't have the bare resources to survive, if they can't survive one way or the other, they will survive another way. And that means take it from you, me, or anybody else. Okay? And we have an AIDS epidemic going on in our community. Funeral directors have said to me, Art, you'd be shocked at the number of people who died of AIDS last year. We have a school system that do not teach health education, sex education. They don't want to touch it. The new superintendent, who I believe is the best we've ever had, is attempting to work with the same group of ministers to create a health curriculum, not only for the school system, but for the churches. With the highest teen pregnancy rate in the state of New York. And we've had that for a long time, one of the highest in the nation. And our kids are getting their sex and health education on the streets, and not in the school and not in the churches. These ministers are attempting to change that. And we're very excited about it. They're going over to Boston and look at a city that has had only 1 murder of a teenager in 4 years. I've been there 3 days, and I tell you, it's working. You've got to say to the mayor, Mr. Mayor, don't transfer your youth division from the city over to the county. Why do you want to give up having responsibility for your children and give it to another level of government that is even further, more distance away from you? The ministers are attempting to form a task force to develop a comprehensive plan for serving our youth. And I hope that Phi Beta Sigma fraternity will recommend 2 people from your fraternity who will work with the Christian communities and others. The University of Buffalo is supplying people, Buff State, Canisius College, M&T Bank, Fleet Bank, are all saying, yes, Art, we'll work to try to put a plan together. But we'd like for you to call the mayor and say, Mr. Mayor, don't give up our children. Government closest to the people should be the most sensitive. And I'd like to share with you that 94,000 children in the city, 18 and under. 37% of the city's population is 21 years of age. and under. So our children are a third of the city's population, even more than a third. So we can't deal with that and try to make that work properly, my brothers and sisters. We will not be able to have a good city and a good community. And I challenge all of us to become mentors. All of us. If each one of us would teach one. And we started the Mentor 2000 program, and Dr. Roderick Charles has been one of the greatest mentors. He was mentoring 4 children, and all the children now want to be doctors. He's taken them into hospitals. He's shown them the operating room. He has created excitement in these 4 young people who never thought about being a doctor. And if each adult mentored 1 or 2 or 3 children, then all of our children would have the appropriate role model, because so many of them are being raised by single parents, as I was raised by a single mother and grandmother. But thank God, in the community I grew up, in that public housing project, there were many men that reached out to me and were a very, very positive role model and help. And that's what we've got to do now, because our children are faced with a spiritual warfare worse than what any of you have ever faced, worse than anything I ever faced. And our grandchildren are going to face even a more difficult one. And that's why I'm so excited about the spiritual revival that's taking place, because that's going to be key. That's going to be key to the future of this city. And if we do that appropriately and we develop the level of trust among one another, because we, the vast majority, are Christians, and we trust one another, and we love one another, and we want to help one another, then once we start doing that, then developing business. You know, we're number 72, am I correct, Byron, out of 73 in minority businesses. We're second from the bottom in the nation. Buffalo has children are the most endangered children because of a number of factors. But I am optimistic that it's going to be turned around. And it's going to take all of us. All of us.
Some of the points that I was going to touch upon in terms of the social needs of the community have already been touched upon. So I am going to shorten my comments, because I do think it's important for us to be able to have a dialogue with you, the audience who are here today, and discuss some of these issues and some of the concerns in terms of economic development and building business in our community. I'm going to start out with a basic personal premise that I have. In my estimation, a healthy economy has 5 healthy sectors, and not one of these sectors should be overly dominant. The 5 sectors that I'm talking about that I believe are important to representing a truly healthy community are a strong religious sector, business sector, political sector, not-for-profit sector, and education sector. Those are the 5 sectors that I think you will see healthy communities have and strong communities have. I think most basically we have to look at those 5 sectors in this community and ask ourselves, are those sectors as strong as they should be? Are they working, and are they working cooperatively? And I think that's my basic premise for what this community needs in terms of being stronger. Now, in talking about some of the social ills and social issues that we desperately face as a community, I'm gonna run through a laundry list, and the Assemblyman touched upon some of them. He mentioned the teen pregnancy in the community, and the fact that Buffalo has the highest teen pregnancy rate in the state of New York. Unfortunately, this has been a statistic that has plagued this community for many years now, probably for the last 7 to 10 years or more. This community has been at the top in the state in this dubious distinction. So, recognizing that, we have to look at, are we doing enough to fight teen pregnancy, to educate children and families about what can be done to prevent teen pregnancy? The Assemblyman mentioned the fact that there needs to be a curriculum that addresses this important issue. But do we have the kind of community agencies that are working on this issue? If community agencies exist that are working on this issue, and there are community agencies that exist, are they working together? And are they working cooperatively on this issue? What are they doing to communicate to the masses of our community about this issue? And how is that communication getting out? Youth violence and youth crime is an important concern in the community. Now, in the Maston district that I represent, which is geographically in the heart of the city of Buffalo, which has approximately 31,000 people, and census data has shown that the Maston district has a higher percentage of young people than many other communities in the city of Buffalo. So the Assemblyman identified for you that 94,000 young people live in the city of Buffalo, roughly a third of the population of the city of Buffalo. But a good percentage of those young people actually live in the African American community, African American and Latino, should I say. So a good percentage, more than 50% of the young people in our community are young people of color. And that's important for us to recognize. Now, in my district, we have found that young people have a more than average, come into contact, negative contact, with the criminal justice system more than any young person, more than any other young people in our region. And so this is a tremendous concern. One of the things that we have tried to do to address this concern is we have identified a deficiency in some of the community centers that we've had in our district to provide some services for our young people. So we are now in the process of expanding some of those community centers so they can provide the comprehensive services that our young people need. One community center that is being expanded is the former PAL Center on East Utica Street, which now is the home of Friends for the Elderly multi-purpose community center. That will have programming for youth, seniors, and families. Already to date, in 2 years and 2 months in office, we've been able to invest more than $1 million in that center. It's our estimation that to complete that center will require another $1.5 million. Now, when you look at the community that I represent, the expressway divides the Maston district into 3 distinct geographic areas. So what we hope to do is to have one of these major community centers in each geography of the district, so young people and families in each of these major geographies of the district can be able to comfortably get to one of these centers. If you look at the Delavan-Moselle Center in the Delavan-Grider, or the northern area of my council district, that center for more than 30 years has been an inadequate facility, having just a gymnasium, a game room, and 2 locker rooms. So if you're having recreational activities, basketball for boys or girls in the center, then you can't have a Girl Scout meeting. You can't have a Boy Scout meeting. You can't have effective parenting classes for parents in the community. You can't have job readiness training sessions. So we were also able to obtain $1 million in the budget to build an addition onto this facility. So again, this can be a multi-purpose community center in the district. Now, one of the things that I think also plagues the community when we talk about centers and the kind of services that we need is there is tremendous duplication of service. We've got 5 and 6 and 10 people in some cases all doing the same thing, not communicating with each other, not working with each other, and all of those people feeling like they must have their own agency. They must have their own thing that they control. That's not serving this community. People are not getting service, children are falling through the cracks, families are falling through the cracks, and we as a community need to hold service providers and people saying that they want to be service providers accountable to delivering effective services in the community. To a great extent, that's not happening to the degree that it needs to. We all know some of the other social ills. I'm just going to run through them. The drug problem is running rampant. Drugs contribute to the AIDS epidemic that we're experiencing in the community, and the drug problem is also destroying families. Many of the problems that we're having with our youth in the community is because their parents are absent from the household. So be it a one-parent or a two-parent household, those two parents, and in some cases that one parent, is absent because the pull of drugs is stronger than the pull of being a parent. So many children in our community are literally raising themselves, literally walking the streets at night, doing things that they don't need to do because there isn't that parental involvement and guidance. So mentoring programs are very critical. Us getting involved with activities for our youth and organizations that provide support to youth is very critical. Unemployment is a major problem. The unemployment level in the African American community in Buffalo is almost 3 times the county average. So we have a tremendous issue with unemployment, and that's something that the community needs to come to terms with and work on. Poor housing conditions is another major problem. Something that we've worked on very aggressively, again in 2 years in office, trying to identify low-interest loan programs for senior citizens who are having greater difficulty in taking care of their homes, and trying to rid the community of some of these blighted, vacant, unsalvageable buildings that exist in the community. In 2 years in office, we've been able to demolish more than 130 of these structures from the community. That is a major problem because when these structures are allowed to stand, they're used as drug houses, drug warehouses, houses of prostitution, places to store dogs, places to hold dog fights, places to store weapons and ammunition, and the people in our community that live around these substandard vacant problems are victimized by the mere existence of those properties in the community. Now, I just want to talk briefly about our strategy to assist in revitalizing the Maston District. Because when you identify all the problems that you have in the community and you lay out those problems, then I think it's critical for us in the community to have a strategy, and that strategy has to be a shared vision for this community in terms of what do we have to do as a community to address issues that confront the community, and then be able to reduce those issues that are negatively impacting our community. So our strategy has hinged on, and we brought our Maston District Master Plan, which maybe some of you who are interested could look at later. But our strategy has been designed to reduce crime and drugs, and one way that we've tried to do that is by bringing a new district police station to the community, which will be under construction this year, a cop satellite station to the community, which is working with citizen groups to be involved in the policing of their own neighborhoods. We've tried to, as I indicated before, to enhance the delivery and availability of youth services in our community and to streamline those services so we don't have tremendous duplication in service. It has also been important to improve the delivery of city services overall in the community. And another one of our strategies is to build housing of diverse incomes. prior to desegregation in this country, as you all know, our total community lived in the same area. Whether you were a wealthy African American, a middle-income African American, or a poor African American, we all lived in the same community. We are trying to create a dynamic where we are building the kind of housing that people of upper incomes, middle incomes, and lower incomes can, if they choose to, live in the community and live in the community in harmony with each other. And then the final two things that we're working on are identifying and creating job opportunities for people. Basically, at its root, a lot of the social problems that we have in the community are because people don't have work. When people don't have work, as you heard from the first speaker, they turn to crime, they turn to drugs, and they turn to other social behaviors that destroy families and negatively impact their ability to be a strong link in the chain of community. And the final piece of our strategy is to project a more positive image and aggressively market the community. Not only to market the community internally to people of African descent, but to market our community externally so we can attract residential and commercial investment to our community. With that, I'm just going to list a couple of things that I think we can do. I think all members of our community should be held accountable for helping to improve conditions, and that we need to hold people in our community in positions of leadership accountable, yet we need to be more supportive of those people. Sometimes we are very critical of each other rather than being supportive of each other. Those are a couple of things that I think we can do. There are more that I'd like to list in our panel discussion when we get to that phase later on. Thank you very much.
Well, after hearing from the Assemblyman and then from Councilman Brown, I'll tell you, Crystal and Professor Taylor, boy, you got a charge in front of you here, I'll tell you. Also listening to some of the things that Councilman Brown said reminded me of a small point I meant to make earlier. The musicians that played for you, Al Tenney is quite a legacy himself in Buffalo, as well as is Mr. James Pappy Martin, who's sitting back there amongst us today. Mr. Martin was a speaker at one of our earlier town meetings, and he and I came back from the Million Man March with the notion in mind that perhaps there were things we could do individually to help improve the community as well. And I just remember coming into this store earlier on, as well as today, and noticing that on the window, Tafawa Hicks has the Million Man March legacy on his window, so feel free to read that again on your way out. And it just made me think about how Pappy Martin and I started working with a couple other people, and we created the Gemini Jazz Festival for you, which is an idea of some of the things that we can do if we take the initiative to work together. And I think that's one of the points that Councilman Brown just spoke on. So I'd like to take that to heart. On your agenda, you will note that Mrs. Crystal Barton would be your next speaker. And for some of you who are coming in a little bit later, just a reminder that Mrs. Barton is an educator, principal of McKinley High School, and a longtime civic servant of the community of Buffalo as well as Niagara Falls, and has done so many things in the past for our communities with regard not only to education, but to social improvement, that she's quite equipped and an expert in some of the areas that she's going to talk to us about today. And having given her a lead that she's really going to have to wrestle with, I'm going to ask Mrs. Crystal Barton to come up and speak to us now. Crystal Barton, please.
Thank God for my Sigma brothers. Thank God.
All right.
For Tafawa Hicks. I want to thank God for Mr. Martin, Mr. Tenney. I also want to thank God for Brother Tyrone. I think I'm going to call Tyrone. You know, I like that song too. I want to thank God for the young children who are here this afternoon, and I want to thank God for Carter G. Woodson, and I want to thank God for you for being here this afternoon. You know, it was interesting to listen to Daryl. You know, Daryl has been my brother for a long, long time here, and I always talk to him about how he does his introductions and things like that. And in fact, I should have brought my own, because when Daryl speaks, folks, listen. But when he said that Assemblyman Eve was a tough act to follow, and indeed, he is. But that's what we do. We have to follow in each other's footsteps. So it's okay to follow. It was all right that Byron got in there and he did his thing. I want you to know that I shook Byron's hand. I talked to him. I'm on this mic and I'm getting sick too. So I may not be up here for 15 minutes, but that's all right. I'm going to do my best. But I chuckle with Daryl because I love him so. And you know, it's such a wonderful experience to be able to share. But when I look at the program for today, and I think in terms of the social agenda and the economic agenda, I guess I'm in an appropriate place because the education of our children is always right there in the middle. Amen. And so someone said to me, well, would you come and speak and talk about the things that we should do? And you know, it can be a difficult and an emotional response coming from me as an educator, but not only am I an educator, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, and yes, I believe in doing service to the community. It's something that I was taught when I was a young kid growing up in Niagara Falls, New York. You see, way back then, when your mom said you went to Sunday school, you sang in the choir, you went to the community centers, you did all of these things, but it made me a better person today. So I say to you that there are things about education that have often made me cry. And if you have seen what I have seen, then you know why. Let me tell you that the very first thing that I would say that we need to do for our young people today is to be sure that they know God. All right? It is a must. When I look at things social and every day, I became a principal in 1987. I worked every single day for 7 years straight without missing a day because I was so fearful of what might happen to the young people if I didn't get up in the morning and go. That something terrible may happen. I missed one day then because my daughter had to have a major surgery, and I couldn't miss that. And there she was in Children's Hospital. She was in ICU for 8 days, but I missed that one day, and I'd always go up to see if she was all right. I also say that to you because as an educator, when I started out long ago, and I grew up in 2 projects, okay? I faced teachers who would tell you, hey, you have to go to school to become a secretary. You don't need to go to college, you know, you won't get in. There are 16 of us, 13 of us are college graduates. So I'm grateful, and personally grateful to Arthur E. because I went to Niagara University, and you know, Niagara University is a private university, but I was able to go on the Niagara University Opportunities Program. And once Crystal went there, and I did the bachelor's in a 3-year period, the university said, well, would you come and do your master's? And I did my first master's there, but it was because of the work of Assemblyman Eve that I was allowed to do that, and that's why I'm really, really grateful. So when we talk about following in footsteps, Daryl, that's what we do. That's what we do. The second thing that we need to do for our young people these days is to be sure that they know their history. And as sad as it may seem, when we celebrate Black History Month, African American History Month, and of course we all know that it is truly American history, young people just don't know. Assemblyman Eve was at McKinley High School yesterday, and many of those children didn't know who he was or who he is. And sadly to say, a lot of the adults don't know either. All right? We had, during our Martin Luther King celebration, the AKA sorority, we had young people come in and share with some of the people in the community to discuss the history of Buffalo. We did the past history, we talked about what was happening presently and what we need to do for the future. But the young people were to tell us what the expectations are for the future, coming from the young folk. And as I listened to Assemblyman Eve, Florence Ball, Leland Jones, the list went on, and I sat there with my mouth open thinking of all the things that I didn't know. So we need to be sure, first, our young people know God. Second, they know their history. And the next thing, when we think in terms of that social thing, I get up, I go to work in the morning. First thing I'm going to do is check the mailbox to see what's there. And I got to tell you that when I first went to McKinley High School, I would check my mailbox, which was on the other side of the secretary's desk. There may have been a little note in there that said, "You Big N, you only got here because of affirmative action," and that sort of thing, okay? Because I feel that once our young people know their history, it fortifies them, okay? Those little notes being called the Big N and all that sort of thing, go away and do that sort of thing, did not bother me then, because I knew who I was, and I had come to learn. So the importance of learning, the importance of education, saying to the young people, you've got to read, you've got to learn. Many times I go and speak to folk, but for the most part I find myself speaking to adults, okay? And you know how we go to the dinners and the luncheons and all these kinds of things, and who do we find out there in the audience? The adults. We have to teach our young people what we need to know. I'm tired of fighting the young fellas who think it's okay to wear your pants way down here, okay? I've threatened them, I say, you know, young men, you need to pull your pants up, put the belts on. Now, one of our teachers said to him, well, you know why guys are wearing their pants like that? It started in the prisons, because they don't give them belts, okay? And the only way they could kind of keep their pants up was to kind of let them hang and that sort of thing. But our young people aren't really getting it. They need to read, understand, and know what's going on. We need to have them talk to Byron more. The politicians, though I will tell anybody, I've never really been politically inclined, I can see how it works. I'm that one principal sitting in a school, and I don't think that I'm running any queendom or anything like that. I just feel that while politics is appropriate, it doesn't have a place inside the house where we have to educate our folk, because sometimes it can get in the way. All right, it can get in the way when we have to beg and say, we need more money. If I have a parent who calls and says, well, my child doesn't have a book to take home, okay? But if I can ride down the street, and somewhere down the end of, what is that street? One of these streets going south, okay? You find these great big facilities that I see all kinds of folk going to, but I very rarely see many of our children going, because number one, they can't afford it, all right? So we were just having a little discussion here, Byron, if I might be so bold as to mention. We were talking about an African American museum, all right? The need for one to be in Buffalo, all right? And we were talking about money again. In order to properly educate our students, if we don't have monies, then somebody's going to get left on the wayside, all right? In our district, we talk more. We have a new superintendent who's doing an excellent job, We start talking about theme schools, all right? I remember one of the questions that I asked him as one of the administrators who interviewed him prior to his being selected was, tell me what you think about theme schools. Dr. Harris, oh, I know all about theme schools. We do that. We've been doing this. And he will tell you about all the wonderful things that have been happening in the districts that he's worked in before he came to Buffalo. And now when you come to Buffalo, he's accustomed to things being in place. So he says, well, we need another $94 million in order to allow our district to run. And folk are like, the man is crazy. Where are we going to get this from? I remember the president of the board said to me, Crystal, I support the request, but I don't like the strategy in which we need to get it. Well, what do you mean by that, Marlise? Well, I mean, it takes a little time. And I said, well, Marlise, you know, that's the problem. We keep piecemealing everything, okay? Little by little. If we need it, let's get it, so we can educate our young people. Not only am I just this principal here where I see these folk coming in, and I call our young people, our students, young folk, because they truly are. I believe that our students, or all young people, are 25% of our population, but they're 100% of our future, okay? I'm asking to go to number 4 now and say that in our classrooms, in our schools, in our community, we need leaders, folk who will teach our students to have strong and sound moral character and judgment. Because young people are real interesting. As a principal, I get them coming all the time. Well, Mrs. Barton, do you know what such and such a person said to me? Or my teacher said this and my teacher did that. Or young people who are allowing folk to back them up in the corner based on something that was said to them, and then they end up getting into trouble, and that's where those suspensions come into place. And that, you know, I say that suspension is the ultimate form of discipline, but it breaks my heart every time I have to process one. Nobody ever called me the day I picked up a loaded .25 caliber in school one day. Just happened to be walking out of the office, and there was a student coming out too. They were talking to him about a detention. He happened to bump into a teacher who was coming in as he was going out, clanked. And I remember I was turned this way. But for some reason, I think I did slow motion and turning around, because when you hear the sound of metal hitting that cement floor, you know, wait a minute, that's not a sound that I recognize. I'm supposed to be hearing the pitter-patter of little feet. I'm supposed to hear a book drop, okay? Or I'm supposed to be hearing somebody say, hey, Johnny, hey, Sue, wait for me. But I turned around and I just knew it was something that wasn't supposed to be there. And picked this thing up. And I said to the young man, don't you move, okay? Just stay right there. I wasn't tremendously upset or frightened by the young, because he was a young student. He was 15 years old. But I needed to know why he had this gun in school. And that takes me to my understanding and dismay of the violence in our community. And I'm not one of those persons who talks all the time, talks a lot, because we do all kinds of meetings. And I tell you, if there's going to be a committee or something, somebody in the district is going to call Crystal. And I'll tell them, look, I don't like to waste my time. I'm an action person, okay? I really don't want to be talking about what we should do, but what we're doing, okay? Now, just before this happened, the state came up with that new law. You couldn't have a gun within 1,000 feet of a school building. Is that right, Art? Okay. And that anybody found with one and all that sort of thing would be expelled, or whatever the case may be. And I happen to be sitting as chairperson of a rotation committee. Now, the rotation committee is a committee that's at the Buffalo Alternative School. And that same young man came through. One of our teachers at McKinley High School had to teach a young man after school. And you know, he's still in school and that sort of thing, but you may be sitting there wondering, well, why did he have that gun in school? Well, he said he found it on the way to school. So I really try and work and be sure that our young people understand where I'm coming from as principal. It's so important for me to be sure that they make the right decision, that they use logic, and really do some serious critical thinking. And I said, well, let me just take you through this. Now, this is not the court of law, but if you found this on the way to school, you weren't here. You could have told your parents, okay? You could have told me when you came in the door, because 3 periods of the school day had almost gone by, all right? And wouldn't you know that after this happened, and I'm talking to him, and the police come, and the guy goes, oh, this is a real expensive gun. Well, I didn't care how much it cost. It was a gun, and I had held it like this. It was in the school. It was an experience I had never had before in my life. But imagine a young person walking down the street and somebody coming up to rob him or her, and somebody points a gun in your face, okay? I felt it was one of the worst things that could possibly happen in the best of circumstances, meaning that there were adults around. But my heart went out to this young person, because I hadn't had to meet him before then for any reason. But here I was with this gun. And we do all those other things that are social problems, the drugs, all right? You can find marijuana in somebody's locker today, and it's going to be somebody else's in the next 2 minutes the moment you find it. We talk about, okay, what are we going to do with teenage pregnancy? And you heard Byron say, well, we had the highest teenage pregnancy rate in the state. But my concern is, how come we're talking about what to do with the young folk after the pregnancy. Why aren't we doing something to prevent it? And amongst all this, I keep seeing that parent, okay? The parent. Now, I raised 3 children, okay? I raised 3 children, managed to get a couple of master's degrees, that old bachelor's, professional degree, did a lot of things, all right? But I believe that the most important person or persons in everything that we have to do in education today are our parents. We really need for the parents to seriously focus on what the young people are doing. You see, if I also get into a discipline concern with a parent regarding the behavior of the child, many times I'm the person who's going to be attacked, okay? Now, I would say to any parent, you know your son or your daughter better than I do. But we have got to work together. Right is right, and wrong is wrong. And if the young person with me has been wrong, then I'm going to use everything that I can. And I told Art yesterday at school, now with that separation of church and state, it's so important for kids to know about God. I said, and I kind of try and work it in some way to let them know the power of good and evil. Because believe it or not, ask me what the worst experience in my life is as a principal. Was it the fact that I had these 3 students talking to me one day and they said, well, we're witches. And I said, you're what? We're witches. Okay? They're the Wicons and this and that. And the black lipstick, the black fingernails, the really, really black hair. We've got some serious social concerns when it comes to school. Someone once said that our schools reflect what's happening, right, in society. And that's true. But remember, it takes a whole village to educate a child, to raise a child. Then we have to stop doing so much talking and doing a whole lot more walking. But I can't walk, and our young people can't walk, unless we have our parents walking along the same path, unless we have our leaders, okay, and our political leaders, our leaders in education walking in the same path, all right, and our teachers. When I was growing up, and some of you too, the teacher was almost like the holy person in the classroom, all right, much respect for the teacher. And if that teacher called home and said that Crystal did this or Crystal did that, my mother would be all over me and anybody else in our household. But that was a time when everybody worked together. How do we get back to that point? We've got to change some things. We've got to get off being self-centered and think globally about it. And believe it or not, I know and you know that it's not everybody, all right? But how do we get everybody to do the same thing? I tell anybody, I'm no match for the devil. But I used to tell Mr. Thompson all the time, as I walked the hallways of McKinley High School, and every time I went to a meeting and I'd hear somebody stand up and say this and another one stand up and say that, and we were not together, that I'd remind myself that of this phrase that I hear always, if I am with you, I am more than the world against you. So we have to take these young people back, and maybe, and I'm going to leave that maybe out, when we get them refocused, when we get them all to have a good spiritual base, all right? When we get that family structure back to where it really should be, all right? And we get our young people focused on getting a good education so they could become like Assemblyman E, Byron Brown, Dr. Taylor, so many of you, then we'll be better off. I'm frightened that one day I may have to go to a hospital and somebody may be standing there. Is that you, Miss Barton? You remember that time you did this? And that's why it's so important. Respect. I respect the young people that I'm charged to be sure that they get a good education. I tell them all the time. I don't disrespect my students, but I am not going to allow you to disrespect me nor any other adult who works here. I tell them that all the time, because do you know that we could have conferences sometimes and the child could be sitting there and the parent could be there, and you would think when we were younger, we said something indignant to our parent, that parent will whack you right in front of anybody and everybody. We've had experiences where the child would reverse it. Okay? So respect. We've got to work on these things. We really do. And then the voices that stand up and say, yes, give us that money that we need to educate our young people. We're grateful that Assemblyman Eve does it so well. But it takes everybody to be talking the same language. So those are just some of the little things, and perhaps when we talk a little later, I'll be able to share a little more with you. But let's go back to the basics. Tell everybody you know, your sons, your daughters, your grandchildren, your cousins, anybody who's raising children, they got to know God first. Oh, that's the one thing that can keep you strong through anything and everything. Let them, teach them history. I have a very good friend of mine who's Jewish. She teaches at the high school for Jewish studies. And I began to work saying, well, now wait a minute. Tell me how you did this. I talked to the principal of the high school of Jewish studies. I want to know because I feel we should have a high school for African American studies. All right? And a guy told me in the State Department a couple of years ago, he said, well, you got to do it quick before things change. So I'm grateful that I see the St. John Christian Academy coming along. And I believe that Shiloh will be working to get a high school, be the high school for those children coming through. And I go there a lot because I have a granddaughter there. But more than anything is that when she visits me in my office after she gets out of school, and I say, Dorian, who created the world? God did. And how many days? She said, 7. You know what I mean? It's just a normal conversation. These are the kinds of conversations we should be having with our young people. But we can't have them in our schools, and it's missing. I was one of those persons who left school during the day to go and get religious studies. And I tell you, it works. Because if a child can stand in front of me now and tell me I'm a witch, and Mrs. Gully, you remember those witches, don't you? Okay, all right. So I'm not lying, okay? This is true. Then we need to change some things, but we can't change anything without your help. Okay? Mm-hmm. Just a small conversation right now. We'll see you later. Thank you.
From all of the things that our speakers have said today, it is clear that we face a crisis. I would suggest that the crisis that we face today is unprecedented in the history of African Americans. Never before in the history of the race have we faced circumstances and situations as complex as the ones that we face today. A crisis that is fueled by the continuous interplay of very profound and deep changes and transitions in the economy of this country and this world, and the context of the enduring and ever-changing character of racism, prejudice, and discrimination that are still with us today despite commentaries to the opposite, and will still be with us in the 21st century. So for me then, as I try to put a lot of the things that we have to say in a context, and as I try to construct a context to talk briefly about economic issues, the question is what stands in our way of confronting that as a people? What are the barriers that will keep us and are keeping us from meeting these challenges? I will suggest that they are cultural. That culture stands in the way. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the meaning of culture, or defining what I mean by culture. and discuss the main ideas that have informed black culture across the dimensions of time and space, and how over the last 25 years we have moved away from those ideals and principles. Culture refers to a way of life of a people. It not only includes music and dance and literature and the arts, but most important, the ideals, principles, beliefs, values, and attitudes, and the traditions that inform a people's way of life. Culture is not a painting, it's not a poem, it's not a dress, it's not a dance, it's not music. It is the ideals and principles that inform the music, the dress, the dance, the art. It is the idea structure of a people that anchors them together, that forms the social glue that holds them together, and that fashions the type of organizations and institutions they build. The ideas that inform a culture are not mere abstractions. Rather, they are the canons that spring from experience. And black culture in the United States developed out of resistance and struggle against racism, discrimination, exploitation, and oppression. Against this backdrop, the ideals of the group over the individual has been the driving force behind the development of organizations, community building, and struggle. And so these four principles, the group over the individual, community building, and struggle, and organization, have been the main ideas that have guided black people for over 400 years. And of these, the group over the individual has been the engine that drove things forward. It was the notion of the group over the individual that created the cohesion that enabled blacks to construct vibrant communities which helped them to raise children, to starve off economic hardship, and to produce, yes, to produce the inspirational leaders to guide and to speak for the race. The group over the individual, then, was the most sacred of all of the ideals undergirding the culture. From all of the things that our speakers have said today, it is clear that we face a crisis. I would suggest that the crisis that we face today is unprecedented in the history of African Americans. Never before in the history of the race have we faced circumstances and situations as complex as the ones that we face today. A crisis that is fueled by the continuous interplay of very profound and deep changes and transitions in the economy of this country and this world, and the context of the enduring and ever-changing character of racism, prejudice, and discrimination that are still with us today despite commentaries to the opposite, and will still be with us in the 21st century. So for me then, as I try to put a lot of the things that we have to say in a context, and as I try to construct a context to talk briefly about economic issues, the question is what stands in our way of confronting that as a people? What are the barriers that will keep us and are keeping us from meeting these challenges? I will suggest that they are cultural. That culture stands in the way. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the meaning of culture, or defining what I mean by culture, and discuss the main ideas that have informed black culture across the dimensions of time and space, and how over the last 25 years we have moved away from those ideals and principles. Culture refers to a way of life of a people. It not only includes music and dance and literature and the arts, but most important, the ideals, principles, beliefs, values, and attitudes, and the traditions that inform a people's way of life. Culture is not a painting, it's not a poem, it's not a dress, it's not a dance, it's not music. It is the ideals and principles that inform the music, the dress, the dance, the art. It is the idea structure of a people that anchors them together, that forms the social glue that holds them together, and that fashions the type of organizations and institutions they build. The ideas that inform a culture are not mere abstractions. Rather, they are the canons that spring from experience. And black culture in the United States developed out of resistance and struggle against racism, discrimination, exploitation, and oppression. Against this backdrop, the ideals of the group over the individual has been the driving force behind the development of organizations, community building, and struggle. And so these four principles, the group over the individual, community building, and struggle, and organization, have been the main ideas that have guided black people for over 400 years. And of these, the group over the individual has been the engine that drove things forward. It was the notion of the group over the individual that created the cohesion that enabled blacks to construct vibrant communities which helped them to raise children, to starve off economic hardship, and to produce, yes, to produce the inspirational leaders to guide and to speak for the race. The group over the individual, then, was the most sacred of all of the ideals undergirding the culture and the experiences of our people. The jazz group Hiroshima captured this powerful principle of black culture in the lyrics of a popular song. None of us are free. None of us are free as long as one of us is chained, then none of us are free. And so it was precisely this principle, the group over the individual, that blacks increasingly abandoned in the years following 1965, when passage of the Voting Rights Act officially ended the civil rights movement. And when blacks forsake the principle of the group over the individual, they also turn their backs on the precepts of organization, of community, and struggle, and replace these sacred canons with selfish individualism and the American model of success and the good life, a model based on conspicuous consumption, self-indulgence, and selfishness. And within this framework, selfish individualism started to emerge as the dominant mode of thinking. And today is one of the most important parts of a belief system that undergirds the lifestyles and the aspirations of most African Americans. So today, many people view a successful business or a successful career as an academician, as a politician, as a journalist, as a business person, as symbols of personal success and individual achievement, rather than a monument to the struggle and hopes and the aspirations of our people. I did this on my own is a common refrain heard among middle-class Americans. And one of the great ironies of this is that selfish individualism, the more vulgar, undeveloped side of it, is the violence that we see in the neighborhoods and the community. Those guys engage in selfish individualism by robbing and stealing and vandalizing black people. Middle-class Americans engage in selfish individualism by leaving the community, by declaring their success as having nothing to do with African Americans, and by proclaiming that they have no responsibilities to the race whatsoever. Both instances, the masses of our people suffer. And both forms of selfish individualism, regardless of their differences, have the same impact on our community. And as a result of that, we have a crisis of community that gives birth to a crisis of leadership. How else can we explain the anomaly that today in Buffalo, we have a community of scholars, of high-ranking academicians, of which I'm one, of powerful politicians and educators, of business people strategically located in their community, of individuals with great power and influence. Yet the conditions inside of our community continue to worsen, as if none of this exists. In large measure because the power and influence that we possess accrues to individuals, not to the group. And that the individuals have not been able to bridge the gaps that separate them to unite as a group, to address the tremendous problems that we face. The group over the individual is the principle that we have lost sight of. Back in the days when a village existed to raise the children, people thought and acted in group rather than in individual terms. When your parents were telling you that you had to render services, or when my dad said to me, be ashamed to die until you have won victories for your people, that was the group over the individual. That is the principle that we must restore. And if we restore that principle, if we fight for that principle, then all of the other elements of spirituality, of cohesiveness that are necessary to confront these issues will begin to fall into place. For over 400 years, we waged successful struggle after successful struggle because that principle anchored us. So today, our enemies argue the opposite. Listen to the white press. Listen to them. They say it is the individual that counts. Individual advancement is what is important. Individual responsibility. We have to understand where that precept comes from and fight to transform it and change it and restore again to our community not just the words but the realities of that song made popular by Hiroshima. None of us are free. None of us are free as long as one of us is chained. Then none of us are free.
Well, then I guess we're going to start off with our president asking a question. Why don't you, Brother Powell?
Yeah. The question that I have is with all that is happening in the educational environment, and as a whole, all teachers do a tremendous job and do a great job at it, and I believe that. Do you think we have reached a point to ensure that the students are getting the best, that maybe teachers need to stop being licensed and being required to update their licensing or their education or their methods on a continuous 2-3 year basis, as opposed to giving this long drawn out tenure process?
Shall I respond first? I'm sure that we all can kind of respond to that question. Education never stops. And one of the things that I know as a teacher myself, believe it or not, principals are still teachers. My certification was probably in the 70s or something like that, but it is true. And I really believe that teachers need to keep going back and learning. When we look at the new standards right now, and all of our students going to be taking the Regents course, and we started it a long time ago at McKinley, but what you get is that some of our teachers are not able to teach because, well, I've never taught that course before. I don't know about this. So where is that going to leave the student? So I believe that, yes, we need to continue to have our teachers re-educate themselves. But as far as that real hot issue about the certification, I'm going to leave that to Art.
I think that we need to come at this whole education question in a somewhat different way than we have. I think the school reform movement, I think locally and nationally, is basically predicated on the principle that you can really transform education and change the experiences, the learning experiences of students simply by things that go on inside of the building. I believe that we have to work toward linking community building to school reform, and that it starts by building genuine community schools. And to build genuine community schools, those schools have got to be full-service institutions that are open with extended programs, not just during the regular days, but on the weekends. Not only this, but they have to offer a full range of services for the parents and residents of those neighborhoods and those communities. And people who are involved in neighborhood and community reform have to work hand in hand with people in school reform. Right now, many of the people who are involved in neighborhood redevelopment, they don't even know the people who work in the schools. And in most communities, those reform movements travel along very, very separate paths. And in my opinion, some of the places around the country where we're making some of the most important and significant breakthroughs are where we build these community schools and begin to create those kinds of linkages so there can be a kind of coming together of school culture and neighborhood culture, and the whole community is working with the schools and vice versa. And that means a lot of issues, because I know in this city we fought long and hard, and outside a handful of schools, they don't have any extended school programs. When I say extended, I mean schools that are open into the evening hours and schools that are open on the weekends. And I think that until we begin to move in that direction, our school reform movement will be limited to a handful of success stories that are based upon the heroic efforts of a handful of people.
Can I just take time as a moderator to point out that the question that Brother Powell asked is obviously a leading question, and it leads into not only are our teachers sufficiently trained to develop our children in our education system, but in fact is our education system functioning as effectively as possible developing our children. As Professor Taylor talked about things that perhaps need to happen and possibly some things that are going on in other school districts, it comes to mind that one of the issues that always comes up when we discuss this area is money, the budget. And I remember Assemblyman Eve talking earlier to us about the fact that New York State at one point was providing 75% of the budget for the Buffalo school system?
No.
Is there money in the budget for the kind of things that Professor Taylor and Mrs. Barton are talking about? Is there any plan or direction that you could speak to?
Some of this doesn't take money. I spent 3 days in Boston. The mayor took on the custodian unit. He took them on publicly and won. The schools are open after school, full service. They even worked it out that the least senior person working in the school building can work from Tuesday to Saturday. And every school has a community and school advisory body, okay? Every community center is a separate 501c3, so they can actually apply for grants, okay? I mean, I hope, the mayor told me he's going over. I wish you'd go over, Byron. I told him he could send the police commissioner, probation commissioner. Henry is right. In Boston, a whole community is working together for the kids. The probation officers meet with a child on probation at a church. And there are men who have volunteered to be big brothers, surrogate fathers. And that man is there with the probation officer as he gives this young man certain things you got to be in. Richard Clark went with me, and probation officers who work flex time, like 2 in the evening till 10 at night. Why? So he could check and see if a kid was in at 8 o'clock. There was one young man who shared with Richard and knows that because he suspected that his probation officer might be checking on him, he didn't go out with the boys that night. They killed somebody, okay? And he said, I owe it to my probation officer that he might have come by, okay? There are 52 black churches there that are working with the city, with the schools, and the court system. I mean, it's really working. In Boston, when a child is suspended, and Crystal knows we've had discussion. I don't believe in out-of-school suspension. I don't believe in it for 32 years. What advantage when you suspend a kid to a street with no family at home, mother's working, may not have a family. You have to understand, we have a lot of babies who've had babies who never grew up and never finished their education, okay? And so the whole community. But in Boston, they send a child to what is called the Barron Assessment Center. I mean, they can come with 10 guns, a boatload of drugs. Every child is sent there, headed up by clinical psychologists. And they've got teachers there. So that as they're trying to work with this, there's a black woman at Harvard University who created this, who was a former health commissioner for the state of Massachusetts, who says violence is a health issue. It's a health issue. And if you can look at many of the kids who commit violence, there are problems. I questioned John Johnson recently at our Ways and Means Center to find out what percentage of the kids who come to DFY have serious mental health problems. 42%. Young ladies, 60%. Our health commissioner said, hey, those are conservative figures. Okay. Dr. Needleman of University of Pittsburgh, who I talked to 15 years ago, believes that 55% of the black men in prison are there because they had high levels of lead in their bodies. And you know what lead does to a brain as an infant? It literally destroys it, okay?
And many of these kids end up in special education, learning disabled, with the system not being able to deal with them sufficiently and go on. So Boston is working. On the issue of tenure, there's a lot of people in Albany now talking about doing away with tenure for principals, okay? For principals. The principals ought to be rehired or given a contract for 4 years based on their performance, to get another contract. That is seriously being talked about. Al Van, who's a senator from Brooklyn, is sponsoring such legislation. Al used to be a teacher. And one of the reasons for that in New York City, about 15 years ago, I never forget reading it, New Yorker magazine had an article on the 10 best principals in the city of New York. The thing that was common among all 10 was that they violated the rules of the Board of Education.
They violated the rules of the Board of Education. They did what was necessary to do a good job for the kids that they were teaching. And that's leadership. I've questioned, how can you make a person assistant principal a principal without giving them training?
And so I've said to the Regents for years, you need to bring somebody into Albany for 3 months in the summer and take them to a very intense training for assistant principal. And then you need to test them and do whatever you need to do to ensure that they're going to be a good principal. Principals are the most important entity. And so that is being talked about very, very seriously, is doing away tenure for principals and having contracts based on performance. But also, you've got to give the principal everything they need in that system in order to be able to fairly evaluate them.
Into the Board of Regents, you want higher standards? Are you putting in more money? Are you putting in more resources? And no, they're not going to be able to put in the money that, and I don't criticize Harris for saying this is what I need. You know, some people said he was crazy. $94 million, 84 from the state, 10 from the city. You know, but he's saying, if you want me to do what you are recommending, here's what I need. Do you know we got kids in the school system who can't take books home? Huh? Am I correct, Liz?
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay. Kids who can't take books home. Now, how are you going to raise standards if they can't take books home to do studying and to be able to do? I mean, so we've got some major problems. But the principal thing is the number one thing that's being focused on in Albany now as far as tenure, okay?
I can interject on that note, just on behalf of my dear good sister, Crystal.
She is a well-acknowledged, highly acclaimed, excellent principal with our school system, like so many that we do have. And I'm sure she'd probably love to speak on that issue herself.
But I'm going to ask that we take another question from the audience at this time. I see some hands up. And I guess we could go with the education vein and ask Ms. Connie Bowman if she'd like to ask a question.
My question goes back to tenure. Those principals that you talked about who were highly successful went against the grain. What would have happened to them without the protection of tenure?
On that point, I'm a firm advocate in us really fighting for site-based management. Real genuine site-based management. Not charter schools, because I think charter schools is just pie in the sky, but the principle of charter school is site-based management where the principal and the teachers, along with parents and residents, have the freedom, to construct and to develop policies and programs that are going to work. And again, you can apply outcomes as a criteria for that. But right now, well-trained principals or anybody else, if they don't have the freedom to adapt and to suggest and accommodate those schools, that they can't do anything. And because the neighborhood structure of communities exists, and you simply, people make a mistake when they try to create models that they think can go all over the place. Right now, I'm working on a project at Windermere School in Amherst. And what they have discovered is that the influx of large numbers of foreigners, the influx of blacks, and then a huge problem that they have with what they call jumping, people from the inner city claiming and residents has completely changed the nature and character of that school. And they've got to come up with some innovative ideas for grappling with that. The point is that you've got to have site-based management so that creative principals and creative teachers have the freedom to really structure programs that work.
She asked the question that tenure protected them. That's why they had to, that tenure had nothing to do with their own innovative being creative, okay? That had nothing.
These were strong principals who felt they had to educate their children, and they did what was necessary. He's right about site-based management. We're supposed to have that. And Harris, in the article I read in the paper, some of the people were criticizing him for spending too much time with parents. Okay? I mean, in that article, I couldn't believe it. You know, people criticizing him because he's trying to educate parents about their legal responsibility and their, family responsibility to be more active and what. And a lot of people are frightened of that. They're frightened of parents being empowered. Okay? And we are supposed to have site-based education. The Board of Regents have come down with that. It isn't happening in Buffalo because people don't want parents really to have. Most parents are frightened of schools. We've done surveys and interviews with the parents years ago. They say we feel we're insulted, we're talked down to, and so they don't feel comfortable. This man is attempting to make them feel comfortable about the schools. I said to the Board of Education recently at our last meeting with them, the New York State delegation, we meet with the Board of Education once a month or every other month. That was my request last summer, and Harris has got, and it's been very informative for us. And I say to them, when you get ready to negotiate this next engineer's contract, and if you all don't have that school made available to kids after school, then I will be willing to give the power to the mayor to appoint the school board and not be elected, okay? I say because it's ridiculous to have engineers owning the school, charging time and a half for the community to have access to a school that they control. It's insane. And that's what's happening in Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, New York City just got it so that they can have activities with no cost up to about 6 or 6:30. Okay? That's what they negotiated. Buffalo negotiated for what? 20 days a year? 15 days a year. One school board member says, oh, we negotiated, we got 15 days a year so that the PTAs can meet in the schools. 15 days a year. Okay? And they're already in the school cleaning up, and so if kids are over here now, you clean over here. When they finish, you come over here and you clean up. They're doing it in every suburban. I talked to all the superintendents of suburban schools and asked them to send me how do they run their after-school programs. Do they have any costs? No cost whatsoever. And if the community feels they need the school open on Saturday, they can have it open on Saturday.
We're going to take another question from the audience. I'm going to ask Councilman Brown to take a note with regard to the Master District. Here's a man who hears from parents all the time about their concerns and issues. Surely this has got to be one that he hears a lot about. I'm going to ask you to take a note. We'll take the question. Hopefully we can come back to you on that. Please.
Little sidebar, I'm from the city of Boston, and it's true, we have site-based management in all of our schools, and we also have in-school suspension, so.
Oh.
And over a third of our schools are college prep schools.
You're here in Buffalo now.
My question, I guess, would be more for Dr. Taylor. Statistics are showing that within the next 50 years, the nation will be more of a minority majority. What I've been seeing from the news and from current events is that now more than ever, it's like for instance in California, it was the whites and the blacks against the Latinos are versus the blacks, the Koreans against the blacks. It's basically all people of color are getting pinned against each other. Now here in the city of Buffalo, we have distinct races that obviously flock together. It's the Puerto Ricans, it's the blacks, it's the whites, and then the whites then break themselves up into Polish, Italian, whatever. My question is, how do you foresee the communities of color getting together? Now, within the next 10 years, they say it's going to be Latino majority. I'm a Latino. They say it's going to be Latino majority, but even within the Latino community, There are black Hispanics like myself. There are the Puerto Ricans who call themselves quote-unquote rubia, which they cannot be defined in English. And then there are the white Hispanics, which are the people from Spain, or European. They're fighting against each other. How do you foresee the communities of color getting together within not only the next 10 years, but within the next 50 years, since we are going to be the majority?
I think we have some countervailing trends. And one is, it's always important to understand these waste-paper basket terms. So when one says that the Latino community will become the majority, that's not really accurate, because African Americans will continue to represent a huge majority, because among the Latinos, you got Mexicans, you got Puerto Ricans, you got Dominicans. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And there are tremendous cultural differences among those people. And among the Asians, everything is in Asia on that whole continent. And that population group, the Taiwanese are Asians, the Filipino are Asians, the East Indians are Asians. And so you've got a lot of groups that are combined in that. But having said that, since 1965, with the changes in American immigration policy, you've had a huge influx of immigrants from third world countries, most of whom are still very much concentrated in central cities, although not to the same degree as African Americans. And in a lot of ways, this has changed the flavor. But and so we see a couple of reactions. On the one hand, most of the reactionary policies around affirmative action are coming from those states and those quarters where you have large concentrations of minority groups. So it's no accident that California, which is already a majority minority state, is leading the way in terms of these reactionary policies. The second thing is that it's been an age-long strategy within the United States to divide and conquer. And Art probably remembers in the early days in the steel industry, where you would compartmentalize all of these ethnic groups and have them work together, etc., to create all of these different divisions. I think this will be a period that really tests the maturity of African American leadership and the leadership of these other groups to find ways to create unified bodies around issues. For African Americans, it means defining our struggles in relationships to the struggles of other people and building alliances with those individuals and groups. But it will be difficult, but in the 21st century, developing coalitions and alliances with other people of color and leadership reaching out to those people and bringing them under those umbrellas, while at the same time fighting hard for our rights as a people will be the agenda. But it will be very difficult because there will be people at the top that will continuously create these frictions. And I say that in the sense that the nature of the economy is creating these bifurcated job systems. And so the increased numbers of minorities in this country, and all of this talk about the minority being the big segment of the workforce, is only partially true, because those high-level jobs will still be dominated by whites unless a lot of other types of things changes. And that means that there will be a lot of intense competition amongst these other groups for the things that emerges. It will be a very, very, very complex period.
When you're saying our community, are you talking African American community, or are you talking the black community?
I'm talking about the black community, and I say that's a very perceptive question, because not all blacks are African Americans, and we have to understand that. And especially in New York State, where we have black ethnics. You have some black ethnics that have integrated and become African Americans, but they're still connected to the other black ethnic community. And there are conflicts within that ethnic community. You know, there are tremendous conflicts between African Americans and West Indians, and to a lesser extent between black Puerto Ricans and others. But so we have to understand that we now have black Haitians, Jamaicans, Dominicans,
'Cause I'm a
And that-
Panamanian, so I
yeah, and
I
Panamanians,
African American.
and Panamanians, and we have the African Americans. And so that's a part of the equation. And so when I say African Americans, I'm speaking of a specific group. And when I say black, I'm talking just as I would say white, that recognize those other ethnics and that understand the importance of recognizing the differences and the culture, traditions that they have that are similar but different, and building a sense of unity across those cultural bonds.
I'd like to respond. I sort of differ with Dr. Henry Taylor and her on that. I've been in New York City over the years where you have a large Caribbean community, African Caribbean community. And I said to them, why don't you call yourself African Caribbean community if you're black? Okay? You have to understand, when we came over by the boats, they separated us. Families. Some were dropped in the islands, Caribbean islands, some were dropped all over. Some was dropped here. We ought to be the closest people in the world, okay? Because we have that linkage. You know, you might have been dropped, your parents or grandparents in Panama.
From West Indian descent.
Okay,
So
West
they were
End,
dropped over there.
but they were African.
Right.
They were African. That's the common thread. And once you become an American, okay, you know, and I've said to my Caribbean friends, you ought to call yourselves African Caribbeans, as we call ourselves African American, because there would be a common thread of the continent of Africa, okay? You know, so that we don't get into all this divisiveness based on some
What about just
geographical...
black, though?
Huh?
May I slow this down a little bit, because we really can't take the rest of the evening up on this one topic.
Let me just say this. I don't really. We're saying the same thing, and the recognition is simply that we've got different groups with different experiences, but we're all very much connected together by a lot of common, types of things. So those splits within our world are very different than the splits within the other worlds, because much of the antagonisms occur within the same institution. So they're very non-antagonistic.
Let's close that piece by recognizing our commonality and moving on to some other subjects. Your question led to something that occurred to me that I think that Crystal might want to speak very briefly to, with regard to the fact that these issues have got to be getting addressed, at least in our education system somewhere, in terms of the coming together of all the different races and ethnic groups at some point in time. I would suspect that our curriculum is probably trying to handle some of that.
Daryl, I'm sure you know that that's a serious deficiency. Okay? It's a serious deficiency, as I said, which is why earlier I thank God for Carter G. Woodson. But I mean, it gives us an opportunity. I remember some years ago that the board voted to include in our curriculum the African and African American curriculum. Anybody remember this?
Yeah.
This
African
infusion program.
Right.
But I say that to see who could finish it off and then tell me, where is it today? All right. I was telling Art yesterday at school, I had a student ask me, Mrs. Barton, right in the middle of one of our wonderful assemblies, how come we don't have white history? How come we don't celebrate white history? So as nicely as I could, I said to my student who happened to be a white male, well now, when's the last time you read your history book? And he was like, but it isn't fair. I said, it's right, but you have an opportunity to stand up and ask the question right now. One of the things that we try to do at our school is to do a lot of activities and things to include everybody. And just yesterday in my office, we had a soulful feast. All right, but now when March comes into play, we're going to have to go to my assistant principal Riley's office and do another kind of cultural thing. But it's a deficiency. But like I said, it takes us all. We all have to be walking down the same path in order to fill the needs of our students. But while I have this opportunity, let me say two things. Site-based management. Another one of my committee members sits way back there. Now, we worked long and hard on getting this particular...
Is that Greg Brown?
That's Greg.
Okay.
Greg was very outspoken. We really needed Greg. The problem we still have with site-based management, though, is that while we are kind of in the the play acting part of it. It doesn't work everywhere. We have the teams. That's a big problem, but our parents are on it, you know. And another thing, if you're going to truly have site-based management, some dollar bills comes with it, because if you have a team in the building, each building is really different. Let the team say what kinds of teachers can be walking in the door, what do our students really need, because it doesn't matter what I need, okay, because my needs reflect what our young people need in the building, and that's truly site-based management. When you can say, well, we need a teacher for this, we're interviewing, we're hiring, and in other places, perhaps in Boston and everywhere else, if you got a team, they're doing everything to suit the needs of the children. That's not on the issue of teacher tenure. Yes, there was a lot of talk about teacher tenure simply because it kind of goes like this. If you see a new teacher coming in is fantastic. New teachers want to work. You just love them because they're working hard. They're doing everything. Sometimes you may find somebody at the other end of the scale, meaning I've been teaching for a long time, I got a contract, I can sit down and I'm not going to do anything for a while and defy anybody to come in and tell me I'm not doing my job. It has been an issue to try and eliminate that tenure simply because you want to be able to keep creativity going. You want the students to continue to be taught. So I appreciate anybody talking about, you know, the principals in tenure, and I'm happy to say I don't think I have that kind of problem. But for the principal who stands up and defies the Board of Education or anyone else, I say right on, because we're here for the young people. All right, and that's what it's all about.
Can I collectively just say for people who don't know that the site-based management team concept is just about the community coming together to participate, as our speakers have eloquently talked about earlier, in helping to make our school system better. I'm making a very short definition of something that's very, very provocative as well as lengthy in definition. We're going to take another question from the audience now. There's several hands up, and I think I see people pointing to Brother Roscoe Henderson. I know Henry Coleman had his hand up for a while, but Henry, can you defer to Brother Henderson? He's a sick man, we're going to tell you. No. Brother Henderson. Senior too, Byron. And with you, Mr. Gill.
To the professor, having lived in New York for a long time, how did you describe this other ethnic group of power brokers, whites, who only deal with certain black groups, mainly brothers from Africa, who don't deal with the brother?
I think you pretty much just described that. I mean, I think that one of the things you're talking about today or yesterday.
Well, it still persists. Like in real estate, there was a project that opened on Long Island, and they only let the people that control the money only let certain blacks from Africa be in charge. And they were hard on their brother.
Well, I don't know about that.
And this exists, across the board.
I don't know about that particular case, but there's just been a long legacy of those kinds of collaboration. I mean, I think the difference between in the past and today is that before 1970, so much of what happened in our community was defined in terms of how it impacted the community as a whole. And so we even developed terms as a way of reinforcing that. Uncle Tom, for example, was a way that we described people that did not collaborate and work with the community. We've lost sight of that. I mean, you don't even hear anybody call an Uncle Tom anymore, except every now and then. And so those bonds are much weaker, and there's a culture that has emerged where people collaborate now across class lines that may or may not benefit things. And I think that's one of the things that we have to get back to, of looking at how activities that impact the whole community. But I don't know about that particular situation in New York City.
We're going to take a question from...
question over here.
I asked Henry to defer again because Brother Farrakhan had his hand up as well, but I'm going to ask that Brother Farrakhan defer one time and let Brother Coleman get his question, if that's okay.
And you'll get it right this time.
And he's a cue. Okay, I correct that.
all that aside, I've listened to several comments, and you touched on the issue of trying to get through kids and involving the parents in the educational process, and obviously you can't educate them if you don't have that kind of support that you need. And I don't understand the legal implications of it, but is there any way to require that parents come to the school or in a counseling session or as a part of the educational process? I live in a community in Ohio that required that. As a parent, you scheduled to come in and talk with the counselor and your child's teachers, or if you did not, your kid was suspended and you had to bring them back. And you could only leave the kid be suspended, I think it was 2 days. By that third day, then you hear from somebody legal. And so consequently, you scheduled time to come in and sit down and talk with the counselor. And I'm just wondering now, and given that we've got such a deep hole to dig out of, and maybe it sounds drastic, I don't know the implications of it, but is that a place to start with an idea like that? I understand, as Mr. Eve said, that parents generally are intimidated, and my mother was the same way, but she still showed up to be supportive.
I go right back to building community schools. Because you've got to create real connections between communities and schools. Now, when my daughter was in public school, she had been in high school, and one of my staff members also had her daughter in school there. It was unbelievable the wars we had to fight with the teachers and the administrators. And I would say to myself, if I got to go all through this, and I'm Henry Taylor, and this is what I got to go through, what must it be like for everybody else? Now, I don't know whether being in high school is a prototype of other places, because my experience was narrow, and I can only go by what other people have said. But if you can't create real connections between these schools and these communities, it really doesn't work. The other part is that we've got to find real ways to support the education of the kids. And I mean, working with your kid and doing homework and all that other stuff. Again, as a parent, I got a 7-year-old. And I know you got a 7-year-old, and you come home, that is hard. You're tired, I got to do spelling words. And it's hard because every Friday there's a spelling test. So I got to do spelling on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And because my wife says I do the other homework, you got to do spelling. And if he flunks spelling, it's just you. And so, and then so it gets restructured. So as busy as I am, Thursday is my crunch day with spelling. So I take off at 3 o'clock, and from 3 to about 7, 8, I'm dealing with spelling. Now, if it's hard for me, and I sit down with homework sometimes. I got a PhD, 2 master's degree. I write books and articles, and I sit down and look at the homework. I said, man, it's second grade homework. And I'm looking at that stuff, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I said, well, do you know how to do this? And he said, oh, Dad, you silly. Yeah, I know how to do this. And I said, good. So, and you know how to do this. I know your wife know that you not do homework. Because Byron and our son are the same age. And so what I'm saying is that we can't mystify what it is about. And so we've got to find ways. I'm like you at one level. I always live with this contradiction. As a scholar, I spend half of my life reflecting, thinking, and planning. And then the part of me is impatient with that. I do real world projects. But this business of educating our kids is going to take more than these parents. Yes. And we got to understand that the parents have got to be involved. But we got to have some systems that help us. And we don't have much. I look at these private schools, and my little one goes to private school now. And he went into the first grade when we took him out of a church-based school. down there on Adams Street, because his mother was running a prime school, and we thought it was pretty cool. First grade, can read, he's struggling a little bit. 6 weeks into the school year, the teacher, we come in for a counselor, said he's doing well, but he's really struggling reading instructions. This is 6 weeks into the first grade. Because all of the other kids were already doing that. Because they had already, by the time, these little white kids and the black ones with them, by the time they had reached first grade, they had already been through 2 years of structured academic programs. And so what I'm saying is that we got to understand that a system is being put into place where you won't need racism as we know it. The educational systems and all of those other disadvantages would have done that. And they play games with us along those lines. In 1954, when the Supreme Court declared school segregation illegal, everybody in the United States knew that there was already a massive movement to the suburbs. Everybody already knew that. There was study after study after study. 3 years later, Eisenhower would put together the Great Interstate Highway Package. So they knew in 1954 that in a short period of time there would not be anything but black and poor people. Then in 1972, in the Detroit Supreme Court case, they ruled against metropolitan-wide desegregation, which meant that the city boundary became some kind of postmodern Maginot line. Once you cross over it, you no longer had to worry about those kinds of issues. So, I didn't mean to get off on my soapbox, but this question of education is serious, and it's going to take a community working with these parents and building creative institutions to help. We cannot put that kind of burden on these parents who are struggling just to make ends meet.
When we talk about education, when we talk about spirituality, when we talk about building institutions and structures and neighborhoods that were long left by others who left it to die, when we talk about reviving and renaissance, we have to talk with a language that will take us into the 21st century with something in our hands as opposed to coming to the table with our hands looking like cups. Integration is when you bring something to the table, not when you go there and try to take something away. So I just wanted to make that clear, and all of y'all inspired that to me in terms of spirituality, educational, institutions that we could touch and see and live in, and that's important, and a philosophy that's grounded in truth, that is time-tested throughout the annals and history of time, and that is our African or human heritage. And every human being on this planet can claim Africa as their homeland. And we need to start thinking that way, because then we'll be globally in the position of leadership that we deserve as a people.
Okay, can I just respond to one piece? When I mentioned the Jewish faith, I talked about Jewish leaders who were involved in a statement about welfare cuts. I said, I gave Bishop Mansell, I gave Bishop Bowman, Rabbi. That was not about some spirituality. I was stating the ministers and the religious leaders who participated in a fantastic statement. Unfortunately, there were no Muslims as part of that statement, okay? There was no Muslim as part of that statement. That was not saying I was ignoring the Muslim faith. I was just giving you the facts of the people who participated, and which I thought was the best response to people saying we want to cut people off of public assistance. I want to make it clear to my sister here is that, I'm not saying take away tenure from principals. One thing I am saying, though, they need to be better trained and better prepared. And I've said to the Board of Regents, I'm going to hold you responsible, not that school board. If you don't want to get involved with ensuring that they have certain amount of training and skills before they take on that role, then I said you are shirking your responsibility. I addressed the whole Board of Regents 3 weeks ago on Monday because I was angry at the Commissioner of Education when he came before us and did not make certain requests that I thought he should have made. And I asked for the opportunity to address them, and I did. And we talked about them being an advocate for the least of God's children. They're not an advocate. Okay, the state university didn't ask for another dime in the budget, okay, for EOP or even for more full-time college professors or whatever. I mean, it's like nothing I've ever seen before, okay? It's frightening. I mean, Henry is correct. I mean, people want to take away all the gains, all the programs that really helped a lot of people in a lot of time. But I think the principals and assistant principals, the State Board of Regents ought to have some input in ensuring that as best they can, that these people are prepared to take on the responsibility of leadership, okay, in a school building to educate the children of this. And every city in this state, this is the most segregated school system in America. I don't know if you all know it. New York has the most segregated school system in America. Not Mississippi, not Alabama, not Georgia, not Florida where I'm from. New York, okay? Every city school district in this state, the majority of the students are minorities. Even Albany, with only 14% black population, the majority of the students in the schools are minorities.
We're talking about public schools.
Public schools, okay? Because they send their kids to private schools, okay? The other thing you need to know, I'm encouraging black churches to start schools. I've been doing that for about 12 years now. I came up with an idea 2 years ago. One church, not anything to take away from I don't believe in taking public money and giving to private schools, okay? The charter school thing that people are trying to do. I don't believe in that. But if we're going to have black leadership that's going to be strong, committed, fearless, okay, ready to take on the world for the group, it's got to be nurtured, developed, and educated at least in the formidable years. And I've taught to some churches about starting school with children from age 3 to the 4th grade, okay? Taking kids age 3 and educating them through the 4th grade. One church, one class, okay? And taking the responsibility of educating those kids in a culturally sensitive, spiritually, moral, principle foundation. Because if we don't do something like that, like St. John's Academy, and now First Shiloh is going to have a high school, we will not have, in a great degree, we will not have the quality of leadership that I think the racism Henry is telling is so